Next up, we'll be hearing from economists, small business owners for a comprehensive take on how small firms impact the economy and how current policies are impacting small businesses across the country. I'm pleased to welcome on stage Doug Holtz-Eakin, President of the American Action Forum, Heidi Shearholtz, Senior Economist and Director of Policy at the Economic Policy Institute, entrepreneur Andy Shalal, who's the founder of DC's famous restaurant Busboys and Poets. He's also the chair of the district's Workforce Investment Council, and Angel Rich, founder and CEO of the Wealth Factory, which creates financial literacy and workforce development education technology games. And with them is the Hill's staff writer Sylvan Lane, who will be leading this conversation. Over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming out to the museum for our discussion today. Obviously, there's a great way to celebrate Small Business Week is talking about how small businesses can grow and thrive and create new jobs. And one thing that we've noticed covering the Trump administration is that the president and his allies and the Republican Congress have all emphasized that their main priority, one way or another, is to create jobs, often through the lens of helping small businesses grow and thrive. So I want to open up with sort of a general question that I think will be an interesting guide for us moving forward. Can you think of, and this is open to everybody, whoever would like to start, what is one thing that the president can work with Congress to do, or maybe just through the executive, to help small businesses create jobs in this new economy? Heidi, would you like to say?
I'm happy to. So one of the things that's a barrier to small businesses is that all employees know that at some point in their life, they are going to have to take time off to either take care of a family or to take care of themselves. Big businesses have a competitive advantage because they're more likely to be able to afford things like paid family leave for their businesses. That puts small businesses at a competitive disadvantage. So if we were to do something like pass a federal paid leave bill, that would help small businesses grow and thrive. So just to put some numbers on this, there was a survey done earlier this year that was a nationwide survey of more than 1,500 small businesses. 70% of them agreed that a federal paid family leave bill would be good for their business. So that's the kind of a sort of pro-small business policy that I think could really help boost help small businesses thrive.
I totally agree with that. And as an entrepreneur, I believe that one of the great things that would help is early stage founders typically have trouble with family and friends around. If there were policies put in place to actually help with that part of starting a business, that would be great. Most businesses fail not because of the actual business, but because they run out of capital. So providing more access to capital would be great with things like small business innovation research, where the federal government agencies are already required to set aside 5% of their funding to be able to go to innovative research for small businesses. So if that was more heavily pushed to places like HBCUs and opened up to maybe even high schools, and I actually just came up with that just now, open it up to high schools.
We're making news, folks.
Really. And then that would be able to provide a more open access to capital to help ease that burden of being able to get started and being sustainable.
And
I think one of the difficulties right now for small businesses to grow is finding the right people, is finding a trained workforce. As head of the Workforce Investment Council here in DC, we have a lot of challenges. And we have a lot of challenges of people that want to work but unable to work for multiple reasons. And there are many, many barriers we can talk about that prevent people from getting jobs and be able to stay in the jobs, and for businesses to find a very competent, trained workforce. Because I know from my perspective as an entrepreneur, as a business person here in DC, my growth is only as robust as the kind of people I can find that can continue to do the work that I offer for them.
So one of the really troubling statistical developments over the past couple of years has been a steady decline in the rate at which businesses have been started in the United States. And a few years back, it actually dipped below the rate at which businesses go out of business. So we were actually creating fewer businesses than we were losing. And that's very much against our tradition of entrepreneurship and entry of new firms and things. And so I think looking at everything that makes it hard to get in and start a business is the right focus. That'd be good to get the economy as a whole. And the thing I noted, so I was saying backstage, I have two roles here. I'm an economist, so that I'm the nerd. But I started a business 7 years ago. I started a think tank. It's now 26 full-time employees, and I've lived the complaints that small business owners have about the regulatory environment, and I just want to say it's a real issue. And one of the things that the administration has done that will temporarily help is this sort of freeze on new regs, one in, two out, things like that. I think that's a noticeable impact. That's the one noticeable impact we've seen in the economy so far, but that doesn't seal the deal. There has to be a whole lot done going forward in terms of sensible regulation and an environment for better growth and access to capital.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the point about regulations, because I know that's been a major focus of the Trump administration and the Congress early on. Throughout Congress, there's been a lot of Obama-era regulations that have been repealed or drawn back through this process called a law called the Congressional Review Act that's been getting some unprecedented attention. And like Doug, you mentioned the president's orders on issuing new regulations. And I'm interested to hear from you all what you think are some of these key regulations that are hampering small business growth or hampering small businesses from bringing on new employees.
Well, for one, the Minority Business Development Agency, I hear that there's maybe consideration to take that out of the budget. Literally, after I leave this meeting, I'm headed over to the Minority Business Development Agency because one of my good friends, Natalie Cofield, is signing a deal with them to do digital online coaching with entrepreneurs through the Walker's Legacy. It's a historic MOU that she's actually doing. So being able to utilize and work with the Minority Business Development Agency is essential. I actually was able to gain a $3 million contract with the Department of Health and Human Services through it. My company is the only company in the country that provides financial literacy counseling in exchange for community service hours so that people don't have to pick up trash and they actually become rehabilitated. So things like that are able to come out of the MBDA, and I think that it's important that it remains a part of the budget.
I think we have to understand that for any sort of new regulation, any kind of new initiative or new policies, a lot of progressive policies that are coming through here in Washington, D.C., there's an impact that happens on small business. Oftentimes that's forgotten. You can't have one without being able to either pull back on some of the taxes, pull back on some of the costs of doing business, and expect things to continue the same way. So I think there's a lot of stuff being poured at small businesses particularly. And I think, like others have mentioned, small businesses are going to be the ones, they're going to be the canaries in the coal mine. They're going to be the first ones to go. Large businesses can withstand the changes, can withstand and be able to make quick shifts, but small businesses are the ones that get hurt the most. And, everybody knows small business is the biggest engine for jobs. It's, so when we continue to hurt ourselves on one end, we really are we're shooting ourselves in the foot, basically. So the idea, I think, what's happening here in D.C., because of lots of the progressive initiatives that are being put forward, like the $15 per hour, the paid family leave, the sick leave. We're talking now about the one wage, where the tip wages will be removed, especially for restaurants and other tip workers. It's going to make it really difficult, and it's not something that you can just change in a vacuum, because when you make those types of changes, they have a huge impact on the type of leases that you sign, on the kind of arrangements you have with your landlords, on all kinds of different things, on your business model in general. And businesses are not that nimble. They're not able to just quickly change as fast as a policy is put out. So we have to be really mindful of the impact of these policies when they're coming all at once at small businesses, what that impact will be on the other end.
Heidi?
Yeah, I agree that a couple of the things that you said made me think of, particularly when new regulations are issued or when regulations are updated, every firm, regardless of their size, has to go through a process of becoming familiar with that regulation, figuring out if it's relevant to them. If so, how are they going to comply? Those sort of familiarization costs are kind of fixed. Every business faces a similar type of cost. But for a small business, it's a larger relative burden, right? Because for a big business, that fixed cost is spread over a much larger revenue base. For a small business, it can actually, be a sort of larger chunk of their overall cost. And so there are things that agencies can do in promulgating new rules to do things like maybe, and this happens regularly, to reduce reporting requirements for small businesses, have increased times of phase-in times for small businesses. So those sorts of things I think are really worth, and there's actually, it's written into the sort of rulemaking process that agencies have to think really hard. They're required to do a small business analysis to look at the costs and benefits of any new regulation on small businesses and to think about flexible options for small business. So that's really tied into the rulemaking process already. But I do think it's also important to just say that basic standards related to protecting wages and benefits, to protecting safety and health, to protecting the environment, those things are core values about what we want for our workforce, what we want for our environment, that shouldn't be related to the size of your business. Like, those are about the workers, the society, our environment, and those sorts of basic standards need to be consistent across business sizes.
The one that jumps out at me is the $15 minimum wage. I've got an intern program. We pay the interns minimum wage. I mean, this is going to take out more interns than making them read the Federal Register, and that's been tough. So.
Well, speaking of the cost of doing businesses, Congress right now is undergoing a ambitious effort to reform the tax code, and so the president has released some broad outlines and some broad principles that he would like any tax plan to follow, working with the Treasury Department. And I want to know, Doug, I guess we could start with you. What kind of impact would these kind of changes, to the extent that we could figure out how broadly they would be applied, help or harm businesses as they're trying to grow?
So what I find interesting about this round of tax reform, as opposed to, say, the '86 reform, which I am old enough to have survived, is that this is genuinely focused on business taxation. The '86 reform was trying to get businesses to pay more taxes, to cut taxes on individuals and all that stuff. This has been focused on our large corporations, yes, and the international tax rules and all that, but a lot of attention paid to the so-called pass-through entities, which is the place where a lot of small businesses, the sole proprietors, the partnerships, get their tax treatment. That to me is focusing on the right thing. They've got their finger on the pulse of what's not performing as well as it should in the U.S. economy. There's a lot of evidence that tax policy matters, especially for startups. The tax rate matters not for how many people go into business. It's actually, you go into business because you're crazy, and taxes don't influence that very much. But survival, how long a startup survives, how fast it grows, the expansion of its payrolls, its acquisition of capital, all heavily influenced by tax policy. And so I think there's a real possibility if they get a good reform through, that this could be a real benefit to the small business community and to the growth in the economy.
It's also just important, though, to note who will be the primary beneficiaries of this big drop in the tax rate, of the pass-through tax rate to 15%. So the benefits will go far, far less to mom and pop shops, and are much more likely to sort of go to the ultra-rich. And the sort of background information here is that 70% of small businesses already pay tax rates at 15% or lower. And so the true beneficiaries of this drop are going to be a very small slice of highly profitable small businesses who are many of them who are in finance, whose owners are already in the sort of very top income bracket. So it will have some effect for the small businesses, I think, that we are kind of thinking about here today, but the primary beneficiaries by far are going to be this very small slice of the ultra-rich.
Can I say one thing about that? One of the things that I worry about when we talk about small businesses, often there's this notion we should give small businesses a break from this policy in some way, exempt firms under 50, exempt under 100, this, that, or the other thing. The flip side is it's a tax on growth. What you're saying is if you get bigger, we're going to hit you harder. And I worry about the dark side of some well-intentioned policies. And I like tax treatments that are uniform across the size of firms for that reason. They don't have an impediment to growth, and we want our small firms to have the opportunity to grow if they desire.
I mean, you won't find any business people that are going to say, tax me more. I mean, I don't know who would say that. And yeah, why stop at 15? Why not go to 0? You know, I mean, at some point, you got to understand there's an economy there. There's a deficit that continues to grow that is going to create hardships and problems down the road. There need to be really smart people out there who can make those determinations and be able to have some policies that make sense across the board and not put the burden on smaller businesses again. I think these types of ideas of cutting the tax by half or something like that sound really good. It's unfair to even ask small businesses, is that the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? But I do think that we need to be a lot more mindful. We need to fix the deficit first before we start cutting taxes.
I kind of take a different approach to this. I'm actually one of the authors of the FINRA Member Regulation Handbook and had the distinct pleasure of reading every single rule of NASDAQ and NYSE and looking for overlap and recommending new policies. So at the end of the day, all these different tax things, yes, they help the ultra rich. So I try to focus on a different perspective. To Andy's point, what is actually going to help the founder and entrepreneur? What are we actually doing with these taxes? I propose that we actually provide some type of funding to entrepreneurs as kind of a tax write-off as they are founding early stage companies similar to unemployment. I know so many friends that purposely get fired from their jobs just so that they can receive unemployment to be able to go off and start their company. So instead of toying with percentages and numbers and all these type of things, if you are a member of an accredited accelerator or incubator program, you should be able to receive some type of monthly check from the government similar to unemployment so that you can, for a year or maybe 2 years, just like unemployment, not forever, so that you can go off, properly start your company, not have to worry about the funding that eliminates that whole friends and family round discussion, and then you're able to go create jobs for the economy. And it's an entire pipeline win-win situation. I don't know why we're not doing that.
I'm glad you brought that up because another major initiative going on in Congress right now, one that I've been following fairly closely, is the Republican efforts to reform and draw back a lot of the Dodd-Frank Act, the expansive financial regulation passed after the financial crisis to help prevent this from happening again. A lot of Republican critics of the law have said that it's a stifling business, it's making the cost of business higher, it's restraining lending. Some Democrats countered that the data doesn't bear that out in a lot of cases, and that there are some underlying trends in the economy that aren't good, but not all of them could be directly attributable to Dodd-Frank. Andy and Angel, I'd like to ask you, have you noticed, I guess, since the financial crisis and since the recession, is it more of an obstacle? Is it more challenging for small business owners or aspiring small business owners to access the capital they need to get the ball rolling?
Absolutely. I think for businesses that are established, it's a much less risk, of course, for any kind of lender. I think women and people of color always have had an issue accessing to capital. I think we have that problem here in DC. I mean, I work with DC businesses and entrepreneurs, and I know that is the first thing that they bring up is lack of access to capital, and the regulations have gotten much tighter, and it's much harder to be able to get capital. When I started my business, I remember going around looking for money. It wasn't easy, but it certainly wasn't that difficult. As long as you had fairly decent credit, you were able to get money. But now it's going back to ask for more money, even at my stage of business, which is pretty established. It's not that easy.
There are big differences across the geography. What we've really seen is in more rural parts of America, small towns, the sort of heavy imposition of standards on those regional and community banks has made it impossible for them to make some loans that they might normally have made to start up businesses And it's really shown up across the geography. We've seen big differences across counties in the U.S. in the rate at which people can get credit and the rate at which they can start businesses. And I think that's a place where the Congress would be wise to really focus and start with the regulatory burden on those community and regional banks.
Again, I look at this differently. I am a person that actually worked on the Madoff case in 2008. I was at FINRA in 2008 when the crisis happened. What are people doing with this money? What is the money that they are receiving? Similar to the crisis with the subprime. Sure, let everybody have a house that they can't afford. So these policies have been able to, they're stricter for a reason, to be able to allow people to have the protection that they need and to protect them from the ignorance of themselves trying to get money that they shouldn't have. So I do think that the policies should be stricter because they're better for the economy in the long run.
Now, Heidi, I know one prominent regulation that has received a lot of criticism from Republicans and has been fiercely defended by some prominent progressives such as Elizabeth Warren. I know Tom Perez, current DNC chairman, was very in favor of this, the Fiduciary Rule for lending. Can you give us kind of a state of play as to where that's at right now and the kind of impacts you're seeing? And Doug, I'd like to get your stance on this too after Heidi.
A mini crossfire here?
Okay, so the Fiduciary Rule is the wonkiest name in the world, but the basis of the rule is, the idea of the rule is simply that your financial advisor has to act in your best interest. And when I talk about this, I'm absolutely, I find that people are absolutely floored that this is not already the case. They know it's the case for your doctor. They know it's the case for your lawyer. These people are legally required to act in your best interest, but there are huge loopholes for financial investors. That means in many cases, they're able to do things like steer you towards investments that give them a kickback, but give you a lower return. And the best estimates, conservative estimates, are that retirement savers lose on the order of $17 billion a year due to this kind of conflicted advice. So that's what the Fiduciary Rule does. It sort of closes that loophole. It requires financial investors to act in the best interests of retirement savers. Where that stands right now is that there's shenanigans going on by the Trump administration. It's just sort of a not even thinly veiled, a not veiled effort to weaken or rescind the rule. They said the Department of Labor has to take time out to review the rule. In order to do the review, the Department of Labor delayed the rule by 60 days. It is scheduled to be implemented on June 9th with some delay of enforcement. But it is, the word on the street is that it will be implemented, but the department, before all the enforcement takes place, the Department of Labor will probably kind of, at the direction of the administration, issue a new, probably weaker rule. That will go through the whole sort of notice and comment rulemaking. The public will be able to comment on it, and then they'll do a final rule. This is one of those really stark cases, I think, of the Trump administration, talking about sort of standing by workers, standing by regular people, and then in this, like, acting in the best interests of regular folks. And then at the same time doing this thing that is very much in the interests of the unscrupulous actors in the financial, not all actors in the financial industry are unscrupulous, but the ones who profit from like fleecing retirement savers, that's who this is really standing by. So it's a really stark difference between what the administration is sort of saying they're doing and then what they're actually doing on the ground.
Now, Doug, there's been a lot of pushback from the business community on this rule. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think this has been such a high-profile case?
So I think there are probably three different things going on. Number one, no one disputes the basic intent, right? To have people get advice that's in their best interest. That's not the issue. It's sort of getting there. One problem that the business community doesn't like is the Department of Labor is doing this through its ERISA authorities. The SEC is not doing anything, and so you're now creating this sort of unlevel playing field, and the sentiment of let's get one and get it right is part of the pushback. Second thing that's going on is this is round three. There have been two other proposed rules that didn't make it over. This is the third. In each case, it's just an issue of implementation, and there are two concerns. One, the cost, and the cost of doing complying with the fiduciary rule is estimated to basically take the sort of small dollar saver out of the advice business, and it'll be just too expensive to serve them. They're not going to get financial advice. They're going to be online reading stuff, and that'll be that. And so doing it in a less costly fashion so that the good advice is going to the people who probably need it is a second concern. And the third is open to litigation. Right? They view this opens the door to a lot of litigation against financial advisors, and they'd like to have something that wasn't quite so much looks like a giveaway to the tort bar. So those are the concerns that I hear about this. I don't think it's a crazy idea to try to get this right. It's a big deal, and to go back and do another proposed rule and get some comment on it would be a very sensible thing in that kind of environment.
Now, naturally, an important part of saving for retirement is the wages you're earning while you're working. And one kind of prevalent problem throughout the economy has been that wages haven't quite grown as much as they have in the past. And I would like to kind of open this up to everybody. I guess, starting with Angel, what do you think the number one reason from your experience have you noticed that wages haven't quite gone up along with the rest of the economy recovering?
As somebody that used to be a waitress and a bartender, was making $8 an hour working at Walmart, and then was making $91,000 by the time I was 24, and then now am an actual employer that has to hire people, I kind of understand the conversation from all perspectives. And I believe the main reason that it hasn't gone up is kind of, Andy has a good point. When you raise the minimum wage, the company then has to respond to that, and they are now required to pay it. Even I have people that I'm paying lower, like high school students and stuff, and I'm like, gosh, to pay them $15 an hour, that's a lot. But at the same time, the economy needs it. I know people that make $15 an hour, and I have no idea how they surviving. Like grown people, like I can't fathom how people are surviving off of $15 an hour. Like it's really sad. So it definitely needs to increase. So I believe the compromise needs to be a staggered approach. I believe that it needs to happen over a 2-year period and kind of slowly, gradually goes up to the $15 an hour at a minimum wage. And I believe people like teachers aides, I don't know if y'all know this, but teachers aides in DC right now that actually do more work than the teachers are making $15 an hour. It's sad. So everything needs to go up, not just the minimum wage, but the amount that teachers and people that are currently making that minimum wage at 15 needs to also rise. The entire economy just needs to go up. Like inflation, I was working on an algorithm for interest rates right before I left Prudential. I'm very good at seeing the future. Like the inflation is rising, and the income needs to go up and match it, or we are going to be in some serious poverty.
Andy, could you pull off a $15 minimum wage?
Yeah, I think we already have this law here in D.C., and it's being phased in by 2020. We'll have $15 per hour. We're seeing a little bit of a different metrics in my industry. Certainly in the hospitality industry, wages are going up, and there's a lot of pressure to keep prices down. So we're being squeezed on both sides, so to speak. I think the issue is not so much that a lot of that people need to make more money, because yes, I want people to come and eat in my place. I don't want them not to afford to eat in my place, obviously. But I think there needs to be a mindful approach and a phasing in process that has to take into account the reality on the ground for a lot of, certainly the mom and pop type businesses that run on razor thin margins in order to make it, because we will end up having sort of self-selecting the larger businesses, the more well-funded businesses, the businesses that are from out of the area. So we'll lose a lot of locals. We'll lose a lot of, I think, that local business initiative is talked about a lot, but I think is going to be crushed by the new policies, new progressive policies and requirements that are coming forward.
Ready?
So the top reason that I think wages are being held down, it's one thing is important to say is the stagnation of wages at the middle and actually more declining wages at the bottom it's been going on for 40 years. We've seen pretty flat wages for the median worker since the 70s. With the exception of the late 90s where we had extremely tight labor markets and that put upward pressure on wages. There's a lot of things behind it. Eroding labor standards like the decline of minimum wage, increased globalization. The list is long, but I think the evidence is pretty clear that the single biggest factor that has suppressed wages has been the decline of collective bargaining. So unions, when the sort of union coverage declines, it hurts wages in two ways. So unions, when people can collectively bargain, they can actually bargain for better wages and benefits. So people who are in unions get what is known as a union premium because they get the sort of results of that collective bargaining. So people in unions get higher wages than similar people who are not in unions. So when union coverage goes down, fewer people get that union premium. But the other, and perhaps even larger factor, is when there's a high share of union density in an area, non-union workers also see wage gains through these spillover effects because unions actually do this sort of norm setting, like broader wage setting. And so when union density goes down, you also see the loss of the importance of unions to non-union workers. And so those two effects combined, which are both a result of declining unionization, I think I think the data is pretty clear that that's the biggest of many factors, that's the one that's been the most important in holding down wages for particularly for middle-income workers.
And Doug, real quick, we're going to be taking some questions from you guys in about 5 minutes. So if you want to start thinking about what you'd like to ask our panel, we'll get microphones out to the audience in a few minutes. But Doug, what do you, on the question of wages, what do you think has been the number one reason that they've been flat?
We have too slow top-line economic growth. I mean, we're really just plodding along. If you look at the period from the end of World War II to 2007, total production income per capita, sort of rough measure the standard of living, doubled roughly every 35 years. And so in one working career, you could see the standard of living double, and that was the route to whatever your version of the American dream might be, send a kid to college, buy a home, whatever it was. At current rates of economic growth and projected population growth, the standard of living is going to double roughly every 75 years. And so the American dream is just disappearing over the horizon. So everything has to be on getting the economy growing more rapidly. And that has all these sort of nerdy concepts like the rate of labor productivity growth has got to be higher. It's flat right now. Sometimes it's been negative. That's unprecedentedly bad. And I think a lot of it has to do with this business of poor startups. I mean, it's the competitive pressure from starting new businesses. They're the ones that have new business models. They have new products. They are the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones that are going to succeed or fail and tell us where the high return things are. And so I worry a lot about an environment where we aren't starting the businesses and that's not generating enough new productivity, and so we're not getting the wage growth that we usually have.
So if anybody has any questions for our panel, I think there's a microphone. There you go.
Thank you. Hello, thank you, everyone. You mentioned that since the 70s, we've seen a stagnation of really wealth or income. Do you think that since then, immigration policy changes under Democrats and Republicans of really importing millions of low-skilled workers? And do you think that that has an effect on wages when you're importing millions of low-skilled workers under Democrats and Republicans?
So the thing that is, there's good evidence that immigration broadly is actually really good for the country. Like, it raises wages overall. But the thing that is a key part of this, that is actually a real problem, is that we have this big group of undocumented immigrants. It's really important. We need comprehensive immigration reform to regularize those undocumented immigrants, bring them out of the shadows. Because what happens when you have this group of undocumented immigrants? Unscrupulous employers can totally take advantage of undocumented immigrants because they have a real sort of threat they can hold over the head of undocumented immigrants. That puts downward pressure on sort of the wages and working conditions of undocumented immigrants, but that also then puts downward pressure on the wages and working conditions of workers who do similar work to those native-born workers and legal immigrants who do similar work to undocumented immigrants. So I think one key thing that we need to do is really pull those workers out of the shadows. Comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship will raise the wages not just of those undocumented workers, but also native-born workers who do similar work.
Doug?
Say a couple things about this. First thing to recognize is that the native-born population in the United States has subreplacement fertility, which is a fancy way to say we don't have enough babies. So in the absence of immigration, the United States is Japan. It shrinks in population, its economy shrinks, and the flip side to that is our immigration policies are a great opportunity. We get to dictate the future of our labor force and our population, the rate at which it grows, the skills it has. And so I think thinking hard about immigration reform is actually super important. On that note, I will point out, I recently organized a letter of 1,500 economists saying that immigration is good for the economy. It's about the only thing I've ever found I can get economists to agree on. It's a remarkable moment in American history, note it. And the evidence that we've looked at on the sort of wage impacts is that it's the 21st century. And the reality is our workers are competing with workers from abroad, whether they're across the street, across an ocean. That competition is taking place. The impact on the wages of competition, which is real, has already happened. So the act of bringing a worker to the United States and taking advantage of their skills and the capital and the fact that they work longer, start businesses more at a higher rate, retire later, all that stuff is a benefit to the economy. The competition's it's a done deal already.
Well, I'm sorry, Angela, real
I
quick.
was just going to say I completely agree with both. I actually recently wrote a book called
We
History
finally
of the
got
Black
Angel on our
Dollar.
side.
Yeah, I just wrote a book called History of the Black Dollar. It's available on Amazon.com. Highly encourage you to take a look at it. And I think that immigration and things that are happening, we can actually learn a lot from slavery, not to go there. But in 1754, there were only 250,000 slaves before the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney. After that, it skyrocketed to 4 million slaves. And America then became the #1 capitalistic society in the world because of the fact that we were able to produce the cheapest and best cotton. So it's a matter of how we're leveraging the people that we're bringing into the country, not letting them into the country.
Well, we've reached the end of our time. Guys, thank you so much for coming out today, and thank you for joining our conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of The Hill and Paychecks, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've missed any portion of the event, it will be on thehill.com later on live stream. And as a reminder, just fill out those surveys so we can get some feedback. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.